What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and I'm super glad to have you as a listener today. If you're new here, here's what this podcast is all about. This podcast is about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, assisting you in all aspects of your life, and helping you read more books by expanding your definition of what constitutes as a book. That email that your boss sent yesterday counts as a book. The terms of service you just scrolled through before you clicked agree counts as two. Now, speaking of books, today's episode is about a great book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. It is named 4,000 Weeks because that's the average lifespan of a human life, which is roughly 77 years. And the subtitle for this book is Time Management for Mortals. And he focuses not on making the most of your life in a jam as much as possible while you're here kind of way, but more of a, hey, we get it. You're human, you're mortal. This thing called life isn't exactly easy, and let's work within these confines of being mortal, being human, and having limitations. So Oliver's argument in this book is that you must accept that your time here is limited, your life is finite, and you won't be able to do everything you have in mind to do. He says what you need to do is you must operate by realistic parameters in order to make your life a good one and as meaningful as possible. And the way that you can have a great life is by realizing that you can't have it all. This book reminds me of the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown, but focused on time management instead of your holistic life. And if you haven't checked out the two-part series I did on Essentialism, it's a must listen for anyone trying to have a good and meaningful life. Now, Burkeman, what he does is he blames this microwave culture, this Amazon Prime, next day shipping, same day shipping lifestyle that we have. And what he says is technology has created these false expectations of what we should expect out of our lives and for the results that we have with our time. And he says you have false expectations of things that you can get done in a time slot, in a day, in the long term. And what you got to do is you got to realize that these expectations are not grounded in reality. Also, he says you can't control your time fully, but you want to. And that's what we all want. You want a sense of control and a sense of agency. And that's what a lot of this book focuses on, which is control and you trying to take control. And here's the deal. When you try to take control, oftentimes you'll end up with disastrous results. For example, look at Octomom, who already had 6 kids, wanted another kid or 2, and ended up having octuplets. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but 6 plus 8 equals forever selling your plasma and feed pics. So, in regards to control, what he argues is you have to loosen your grip on control, but at the same time, have a plan for your life. He says plans are good. It's good to make plans. Plans make life meaningful. And it's good to have things, big things that you're striving towards. But as you live your life, it's also good to be open to your future going on a path apart from the plans you created. Conan O'Brien, who is one of my comedic heroes, has lived this. Here's a quote of his that I love. I just want to say to all the kids out there watching, you can do anything you want in life unless Jay Leno wants to do it too. Now, that is such a great joke. And if you don't know the backstory, Jay Leno made a promise to step down hosting the Tonight Show back in 2010, and then he reneged on it. It's a lot more complicated than that. And if you're interested in the story, you can read up on it on your own. But when this happened, Conan stood his ground, and what he did is he stepped down from the bad deal that NBC was offering him, but he also had a non-compete, so he couldn't be on TV for a period of time. So what he did is he made the best of a bad situation, and he went on a nationwide tour. And then when the non-compete expired, he got picked up by TBS and had a really great run with them. And then he did multiple travel shows. And then he started a podcast and solidified his greatness as a host, as a comedian, and as an overall legend in media. Here's a serious quote from Conan about rolling with the punches. Nobody guessed what they thought they were going to get, But if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things will happen. So what you got to do is the same thing. You got to loosen control somewhat so that amazing things can happen and so that you can roll with the punches of whatever comes your way. Now, how do you relinquish some control of your time in order to have a better life? Oliver says you need to join a community that has a set time of meeting where you have to be there. And what that does is you lose a little bit of control of your schedule. Now, I recently joined a homeowners association with monthly meetings. And the thing about it is, I'm not even a part of the neighborhood. But what I learned is it's a great place to make friends and apparently enemies too. HOA meetings, where Karen is sharing through swearing. But real talk, join something that meets regularly where you can do activities that you enjoy, work on things that you care about, and commune with other people. This could be a group workout, this could be a Toastmasters group, a mastermind group, but join something that enriches your life, but also requires some sort of commitment because a large part of happiness is other people. Now, Burkeman in the book talks about how sometimes we're so focused on productivity that it hurts us, like when we isolate ourselves so that we don't get interrupted, so that we can be more productive. And through our isolation, we become lonelier. My first summer off as a teacher, I actually experienced this. At the time, I called it my summer of creativity, where I was going to be prolific and making stuff. But in hindsight, this was a mistake because I was super lonely during that summer because all of my friends were working their day jobs. And I actually moved to get closer to my work, which put me further away from all my friends. And in hindsight, looking back on it, I wouldn't have moved. And I should have built out a schedule to do more with my days to interact with others who also had their days free. Also, I would probably put myself up for rent on one of those rent a friend websites because then I can meet new people and get paid at the same dang time. Hashtag winning, baby. Now, what Oliver says is when you get to spend time with people, you become happier. He says in Sweden, when people have vacation time at the same time, they become happier, they use less antidepressant medication, and you can just feel the difference in the country. Also in Sweden, they have this practice where everyone has a coffee and a cake break at the same time at their workplace. And it's a great practice at companies for people to interact. And he juxtaposes this with the Soviet Union's program under Joseph Stalin, where they set work schedules for people to keep the factories running around the clock. But in order to do so, they had to put people on 5 different schedules. And oftentimes, friends were put on different schedules from each other. Husbands and wives were put on different schedules, and they wouldn't be able to see each other much. And what it did is it wrecked the ties that bind. And even if you had more time off than you previously did, he argued, what good is it if you can't spend it with those that you love? And he talks about this problem of having all this free time and all this freedom and something that's trending recently, the digital nomad, which when I first heard about it, sounded really cool at first. And I actually even thought about doing it. But as I thought about it, it actually seemed really miserable. Like you're oftentimes a stranger in a strange land, which is fun in the beginning, but I'm sure over time you get homesick, you miss the people that you care about, the people that you love, and you'll be thinking about them and wanting to see them versus all of this free time and all this freedom that you have. I was listening to the radio recently, and the host asked this question: would you take $1 billion with the stipulation that you can't talk to any of your friends or family ever again? Now, $1 billion is something that most of us can't wrap our heads around. And as I thought about it, the host actually was arguing that would be really difficult for her to give up her friends, give up her family, so on and so forth. And as she was arguing for their importance in her life, I just had to agree. I was like, wow, what good is it to have all the money in the world, all the time, all the freedom in the world, and not be able to share it with people that you love? And yes, you can make new friends and you can build something new, especially if you have $1 billion. But it's not the same. And having those ties that bind are what makes life meaningful. And that's what takes all the luster out of being very free, being very rich in some country that is not your home. And yeah, when you think about it, that actually doesn't seem very appealing. All right. So, in regards to our time, what he says is what we need to do is stop with the incessant question of how can the now make my future better? Instead, what he says is what we need to do is find things that we enjoy for their own sake. Like we need to go on vacation for vacation's sake, not for some sort of self improvement, not for some sort of goal other than resting and relaxing. Because the purpose of vacation is to do just that, rest and relax, and to not drown in hustle culture, which I've seen too many people end up burned out from. And I actually once met a CEO of a company who worked around the clock. He was living that hustle culture life, and he was 30 years old, looked like he was 40, and he smelled like he was 90. And that is no way to live. So what you got to do is you got to sometimes rest and relax. You got to have some balance in your life. And in the same way that he advocates for vacations, Burkeman also tells us we need to have hobbies that we enjoy just for the sake of them. So whether you're paddleboarding or rock climbing or playing guitar, you can do these things just because you like them. That's all. Like they don't have to support some other major goal in your life. Now, I personally aspire to write comedy on a larger scale than just my podcast one day. But even if I didn't, I'd still do it because it makes me laugh and it makes me happy. And by the way, if you're wondering where this hustle culture idea started, it actually has its roots in Calvinism. That's right, Calvinism, which is a sect of Christianity. And he discusses the idea behind the Protestant work ethic, which is people wanted to prove that they were part of the elect, that they were predestined as someone who was saved, right? And so people would develop this idea that they would have to work super hard to prove that they were going to heaven and possibly within the next few hours. Now, I'm a huge fan of hard work. I'm all about putting in that work, but sometimes things can be taken too far. And that reminds me of a Jillian Michaels quote where she said, "I don't care if someone dies from exhaustion from running on a treadmill as long as they look good doing it." Which, yeah, I'm sure you can see the problem with that as much as I do. Or maybe you can't, who knows? All right, moving on. What Burkeman says is he argues in regard to our false sense of control over our time. What we end up doing is we end up biting off more than we can chew, and we don't get the important stuff done. He references a story of Warren Buffett when he was asked by the pilot of his private plane how to have a great life. And this is the advice Warren gives. Write a list of 25 things that the pilot wants out of his life and order them in importance of 1 to 25. Then circle the top 5. And what Buffett says is the other 20 things on your list are actually enticing distractions from the truly important things that you should avoid at all costs because they will take you off track from the things that are most meaningful and most important in your life. Now, I don't know what will be a top 5 thing on your list. Maybe it'll be that you want to write a book, or maybe you want to start a family or start a business. I myself actually want to stop a family from starting a business. And if I had a time machine, that's exactly what I'd try to do. I'd go visit Jake and Logan Paul as kids, break their camcorders, stop them from creating their YouTube channels, and tell the world, you're welcome. But real talk, I highly recommend that you do this exercise to fully figure out what you should be spending your time on. And a few things on my list are having a family and making content that helps people flourish. Now, once you figured out what you want to do, Burkeman takes from the teaching of an artist named Jessica Abel and says you need to treat your time in the same way you should be treating your money and pay yourself first by doing those important things before anything else. Prioritize important stuff like your art and carve out time every day to make sure it gets done. And this is why I start each day working on my tan, which, if you've ever seen me, you'd agree that my tan is a work of art. Now, when it comes to big projects and dreams like writing a book, Jessica Abel says break tasks and big dreams into steps and smaller work periods and call them meetings that you're going to have with yourself. And you block off that time and nothing can distract you during that time and from that work. That's how you're going to get this stuff done. Another thing that Oliver says is don't take on more commitments that you can handle. He references the illustration from the professor who brought the rocks and the sand and the water into his classroom and how he fit all the big rocks in first and then the sand and then the water. And what Burkeman argues is that's not a realistic portrayal of life because there are too many rocks and some rocks just don't make it in. And this is much like Greg McKeown's argument to pick a few things to go big on and to say no to everything else. Now, he says with all things, what you need to do is you need to create boundaries. For example, the more efficient you are with emails, the more responses people are going to expect from you. And so what he says is you actually need to train people to be slow to respond to your email because oftentimes they'll figure out things that they're asking you on their own. And you have to set boundaries at work to make sure that you're not becoming this machine that helps everybody at the cost of your own work. And he also says you got to set boundaries with your time to set a quit time for each day. My personal quit time is 6 o'clock a.m. And when I'm headed to my car, my boss is like, "Where are you going? You just got here." And my response is, exactly. Now, as you set boundaries, you got to set boundaries with the amount of projects that you take on. No more than 3 projects at a time. Sometimes you only focus on 1 project at a time. And that's how you can get stuff done because as it's been said, you can't boil the ocean. Now, in the book, Oliver argues to make decisions and make strong commitments to your life choices, to make irreversible decisions, to burn the boats, and to make sure you create a situation where there's no turning back. And he says so many people are worried about settling, which as a person who is a maximizer, I totally get it. But by holding out, he states that you're still settling. And he gives dating as an example of this. He says when you're dating, you're still settling. You're settling for being on a dating app for 10 years. You're settling on being ghosted, being catfished. You're settling on guys who will take you to the Cheesecake Factory. And that's a great argument for settling down and maybe marrying that chick that pets random cats out in the streets, which I don't think she's available anymore. So I guess that ship has sailed. All right. Now, what he says in the book is he says that missing out is actually a good thing. And you need to change your mindset from the fear of missing out to the joy of missing out. And basically what he's saying is go from FOMO to JOMO, mofo. Now, as I say this, I will refer back to the great Naval Ravikant to make sure you don't make rash decisions. Because Naval says when it comes to making a big decision that has an impact years down the road, to take some time to decide on it. Like what college you're going to attend, what city you're going to move to, whether or not you're going to get a tattoo on your back of Steve-O from Jackass, unless you're Steve-O, of course, then definitely don't do it. All right. Now, as we think about our decisions and the joy of living in the situation we're in and not having the fear of missing out, one piece of advice Oliver has with your time is to enjoy the present and to live in the now. I have a friend who was an athlete back in his day, and he was genuinely great. And what he does when you're around him is he's constantly talking about his glory days. all the time. And I totally get it. When you go from being the man to being a regular guy, it's a tough shift, and you do remember those glory days, and it's impossible to forget them. But he is so extreme with it, and I've heard him say on a few occasions when referring to his glory days, back when I was alive. And what I wanted to say to him is, dude, you're alive now. And that's what Oliver is saying to us through this book. But unlike my friend, most of us aren't living in the past, we're living in the future. And what Oliver says is enjoy this present moment. Don't be so future focused, but enjoy your life now. And it's okay to work towards the future, but savor the activities that you do, because this might be the last time that you do them. So treat them with that reverence and that respect. And I do this daily. When I'm pumping iron at the gym, I murdered these workouts, baby. I kill it in there. And I know every workout might be my last workout, because my workout in the gym is such that I might be buying myself a ticket straight to heaven every time. Now, one great piece of advice of the many, many great pieces of advice that Oliver shares in the book is he says to live fully alive, to make the best use of your time, you have to learn to be comfortable with discomfort. And he argues that oftentimes you procrastinate not because you're lazy per se, but because you're secretly worried that you're not as good as you think you are, and that you want and you welcome distraction, because then when you get distracted, you don't put in your full effort, you can say, well, I would have done better if I tried harder, but I didn't try harder, so that's why I got the results that I have. And one thing that he harps against is this fantasy life that we have created in our minds. And he says, you don't need to live in your fantasy life. You need to live in your real life and in reality, because it's the only place you can live. And he tells a story about this brilliant architect that made a blueprint for a mosque that was so great that people wanted to steal this blueprint. They begged him for the blueprint, and this blueprint was so coveted by all. And this great architect stared at this blueprint for 3 days and 3 nights, and then he ended up putting a match to it and burning it up, because he knew that the mosque that would end up being built would never match the one in his mind. And he says we're much like this architect, because we have this life in our head of what we imagine it could be, and the reality of our life, the reality of the stuff that you create, the reality of the results that you get may not align with this perfect vision that we have. And he says perfectionism will ruin your life and it'll ruin your work. And every episode that I make, after I publish it, I see all the imperfections of things that I could do better if I went back and redid everything. But if I did that, I'd be redoing every single episode all the time. And I've done that before, but it's not a sustainable way to make a podcast, and it's not a sustainable way to live your life. So, how are you going to do stuff, and how are you going to deal with this discomfort? Because it's not going to feel good. Well, one thing he says is don't take yourself too seriously. I heard it once said, what I want people to say at my funeral is, that guy sure owed me a lot of money. And that's from Jack Handy, by the way, in case you're wondering. Now, that's a funny quote, and I'm sure people will say nice things at your funeral and whatnot, but the thought that your life is going to be this grandiose cosmic thing that bends space and time, it's not that serious, and you shouldn't take yourself that seriously. And yes, you are important, and yes, you can do a lot with the life you've been given. But in the grand scheme of the universe and human history, the impact that you make doesn't make or break either. And that's actually quite a relief to hear, because that takes a lot of pressure off of you, right? So as I land this plane, what I want you to know, and what Oliver teaches, is as you live your life, embrace your limitations and realize you can't do it all. But you can still have a meaningful life and be satisfied at the end of it. Now, at the end of the book, he shares a story from Carl Jung and his advice to a fan, when the fan was asking him how to live. And his advice was, in order to have a good life, what you need to do is do the next most necessary thing. And if you keep doing that, Jung says, you will have a good life. Now, what's the next most necessary thing for you? Maybe it's to buy this book. The last 2 chapters are worth the price of admission alone. The book is great in and of itself, but I love it when authors put stuff in their book that summarizes the book and also gives actionable steps to refer back to. Or maybe you do a deeper dive and you listen to the audiobook, which is absolutely legit and wonderful. And it's cool because Oliver reads it himself. Also, maybe your next step is to listen to my 2-part series on essentialism by Greg McKeown, because it is a super universal message. It lines up with a lot of the messaging in this book, and it deserves all the flowers it gets from people you know and respect. Now, if you're new here, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss future episodes. And you can also leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify if you're listening on those apps. And if you enjoyed this episode, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot with reach and also with getting better guests in the future. Here's one from Gabriel Lawrence. I don't have many favorites, but Kim Young Kim is definitely one of my favorite podcasters. I know him best from his podcast, Your One Life, where he brings high-quality guests to drop gems about life, success, and growth mindset. As a host, he consistently picks compelling guests and sparks meaningful, entertaining conversations. He's funny, engaging, and has a way of making both his guests and the audience feel right at home. Thanks so much, Gabriel, for your kind words. I appreciate them, and I'm glad you're listening. And if you, listener, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, your review could be read aloud on a future episode. I want to give a shout out to Siraj Rett, who made the instrumental for this podcast. And also a shout out to you for the great things that you'll do from this amazing book, 4,000 Weeks. All right, so that's all I got for now. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. I hope you have a great day, a great week, and until next time, peace!